My name is Emily Carter, and my hands know the language of the earth. For 38 years, I have lived in Madison, Wisconsin, a city of lakes and vibrant green spaces. And for the last 10 of those years, I have poured my heart into Green Thumb Designs, my landscape architecture business. I believe in honest work and the quiet beauty of a well-tended garden. My days are filled with the scent of damp soil, the rustle of leaves, and the satisfaction of transforming neglected yards into living works of art. My most trusted companion in this endeavor was not a person, but my trusty, forest green Toyota Tacoma pickup truck. It was more than just a vehicle. It was an extension of my arm, hauling sacks of rich compost, delicate saplings, heavy pavers, and all the tools that allowed me to bring my designs to life. Clients often saw it parked outside their homes, a symbol of the hard work and dedication I brought to every project. It was meticulously maintained, its engine purring like a contented cat, its paint gleaming even after a long day of dusty work. I prided myself on its low mileage and pristine condition, knowing it represented years of careful use and the backbone of my livelihood. Life felt good, solid, like the foundations I laid for my garden paths. The autumn leaves were turning a brilliant crimson and gold, painting the city in breathtaking hues. I had just finished a consultation for a large project on the west side, a sprawling estate that promised to be my most ambitious undertaking yet. The client was thrilled, the design was finalized, and I was humming a tune as I drove back towards my workshop, already envisioning the sprawling perennials and winding stone paths. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows, and the air was crisp and invigorating. I was nearing the intersection of Monroe Street and Regent Street, a familiar stretch when, without warning, a deafening screech of tires tore through the peaceful evening. In my rearview mirror, I saw it, a blur of metallic gray, closing in at an alarming speed. There was no time to react, no time to even brace myself. The impact was brutal, a sickening crunch of metal and shattering glass that jolted my entire body forward, then slammed it back against the seat. My head snapped, and the world spun. The airbag exploded, filling the cab with a pungent, chemical smell. My truck, my beloved Tacoma, was violently shoved forward, lurching out of control before I managed to wrestle it to a stop against the curb, its rear end crumpled like a discarded piece of paper. Shaking, heart hammering against my ribs, I somehow managed to climb out. The other driver, a young man, was already out of his vehicle, looking pale and apologetic. He admitted fault immediately, stating he had been distracted. My primary concern was my truck. The rear axle looked bent, the bed was mangled, and the tailgate was a twisted mess. It was severely damaged, perhaps even totaled. But there was a glimmer of relief when he told me his insurance provider was State Farm. I had always heard they were a reputable company, one that would handle things fairly. I reported the accident, and true to their word, State Farm quickly accepted liability. I breathed a sigh of relief. This was going to be inconvenient, but it would be handled, or so I thought. The nightmare began subtly, with a phone call from an adjuster named Mark. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, like polished stone. He informed me they were assessing the damage and would provide an offer for my totaled vehicle soon. A week later, the offer arrived in my inbox, a cold, hard number that seemed impossibly low. My jaw dropped. It was thousands of dollars short of what I knew my meticulously maintained, low-mileage Tacoma was worth. I stared at the attached document, an assessment report generated by some system called CCC1. It listed comparable vehicles, supposedly to justify their offer. My eyes scanned the details, and a cold dread began to creep in. Only 2 comparables were listed, both supposedly similar models to my Tacoma. But a closer look revealed glaring, impossible discrepancies. One was listed as being from Minnesota, the other from Michigan. Both were out of state, immediately suspicious given the plentiful options in Wisconsin. Then I saw the mileage. One had 50,000 more miles than my truck, the other a staggering 70,000 more. My Tacoma had barely touched 70,000 miles itself. This was a massive difference, akin to comparing a seasoned marathon runner to someone who had just started training. And then, the final, most infuriating detail. Neither of these comparables was actually for sale. One had been reported stolen months prior, the other was a historical listing from a dealership that had long since sold the vehicle. It was not a genuine comparison, it was a fabrication. This wasn't a disagreement over valuation, a polite negotiation where we each argued for a few $100s more or less. What I received was not an offer. It was a calculated, fraudulent attempt to underpay me by thousands of dollars. They had used junk data, manipulated information, and outright lies to arrive at their absurdly low figure. I tried to explain this to Mark, the adjuster. I calmly pointed out that their comparables were invalid, out of state, high mileage, and not for sale. I provided him with my own research, printouts from local dealerships showing multiple Tacomas with similar year and mileage to mine, all priced significantly higher than State Farm's offer. I expected a rational conversation, an admission of error, a revised offer. Instead, I got stonewalling. Mark repeated robotically that their system was industry standard, that their offer was final. He spoke in platitudes, his voice still smooth, but now with an underlying current of dismissive irritation. It was as if I was speaking a foreign language. My first attempts to escalate the issue were met with a brick wall. I requested a full copy of the other driver's insurance policy, believing it might contain details about their coverage limits or other clauses that would shed light on their tactics. Denied. Twice. This was a clear violation of Wisconsin law, which mandates that policyholders or those directly affected by a claim have the right to review relevant policy information. I cited the statute, polite but firm. Still denied. It was a deliberate strategy to keep me in the dark, to prevent me from understanding the full scope of their obligations or my rights. Every time I tried to speak to a supervisor, my calls were routed back to Mark, the very person I was complaining about. It was a frustrating, circular dance designed to exhaust me. My rental car, provided by State Farm after the accident, was cut off abruptly, weeks earlier than I had anticipated, long before any resolution was reached regarding my totaled truck. This was a huge blow to my business. I couldn't transport plants or tools. I had to cancel consultations and delay projects. My income suffered immediately. The financial strain, combined with the stress of fighting a giant corporation, began to weigh heavily on me. The frustration simmered, slowly turning into a cold, hard anger. This wasn't just about my truck anymore. It was about the principle, about the blatant disregard for honesty and fair dealing. They were trying to take advantage of me to push me around, and the thought of it made my blood boil. I felt violated, not just by the accident, but by their calculated deception. My life, which had been so steady and predictable, was now thrown into disarray by this audacious fraud. I am a meticulous person by nature. In landscape design, every measurement, every plant choice, every angle matters. I apply that same rigor to my personal affairs. From the moment the accident happened, I decided I would document everything. Every email I sent, every email I received. For every phone call, I immediately followed up with a detailed email summarizing the conversation, asking the State Farm representative to confirm its accuracy. This was my shield, my weapon, my silent promise to myself that if something went wrong, I would have the proof. And something was clearly going very, very wrong. Mark's responses became even more curt, refusing to acknowledge my points, sticking to his script. It was a battle of wills, a frustrating dance where one side refused to engage honestly. My patience, usually as deep as a well, was beginning to run dry. The outright refusal to provide the policy details, the deliberate misrouting of my complaints, the premature cutoff of my rental, all of it painted a clear picture of a company employing unethical, if not illegal, tactics to avoid paying a fair claim. I felt a growing sense of isolation. Who could I turn to? Who would believe me? They were a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and I was just one landscape designer from Madison. But beneath the frustration and the fear, a new resolve began to harden. They thought I would fold, that I would eventually just accept their crumbs and disappear. They clearly didn't know Emily Carter. My world was indeed shaken, but instead of breaking me, it was forging something stronger. I was unsatisfied, deeply so, with how things were. And I knew with absolute certainty that State Farm had become my nemesis. My frustration with State Farm's blatant disregard for truth and fairness only intensified. I had meticulously documented every single interaction, every email, every phone call confirmed by a follow-up email. My desk, usually covered with blueprints and plant catalogs, was now buried under a growing mountain of correspondence. I had printouts of every single communication with Mark, with the various customer service representatives, with the so-called supervisors who mysteriously disappeared or rerouted my calls. I had screenshots of their fraudulent comparables from the CCC1 system, side by side with my own legitimate comparables sourced from reputable Madison dealerships and online listings like Auto Trader and Carscom, all showing trucks identical to mine selling for thousands more than State Farm's pathetic offer. I had even contacted the dealerships listed for their comparables and confirmed that one truck had been reported stolen months ago and the other was an old listing, no longer for sale. This wasn't just a hunch, it was evidence, tangible and irrefutable. I felt like a detective, piecing together a criminal conspiracy. I decided my next step was to appeal to a higher authority, the Wisconsin Office of the Commissioner of Insurance, or OCI. This was the state regulator, the body established precisely to protect consumers from the predatory practices of insurance companies. I believed in the system, even after State Farm's actions had chipped away at my faith. I compiled all my evidence into a neat, organized file, a testament to my belief that facts and truth would ultimately prevail. I included the emails where I requested the policy and was denied, citing the specific Wisconsin statutes they were violating. I detailed the fraudulent comparables, the mileage discrepancies, the fact that the vehicles were not even for sale. I wrote a clear, concise narrative of the entire ordeal, emphasizing the deliberate nature of their deception. I hand-delivered the complaint to their office in Madison, ensuring it landed directly in the hands of a representative. I felt a surge of hope. Surely, the OCI would see the injustice, the blatant fraud, and intervene. They were the ones who could force State Farm to act honorably. Weeks turned into a month. I received an acknowledgement of my complaint, a generic form letter. Then, silence. I followed up, politely inquiring about the status of their investigation. I was told they were reviewing the matter. The uncertainty was maddening, but I held on to hope. Finally, I received an email scheduling a video call with an OCI representative. This was it, I thought. This was where I would finally get a resolution. The day of the call arrived. I sat at my desk, my meticulously organized files spread out before me, ready to present my case with all the calm, reasoned logic I could muster. The OCI representative appeared on screen, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes. I walked her through my evidence, piece by painstaking piece. The fraudulent comparables, the denials of my policy requests, the early rental cutoff. I showed her the side-by-side comparisons of their junk data versus real market values. I explained the impact on my business, the financial strain. I expected understanding, concern, perhaps even outrage. Instead, what I got was a shrug. A literal, physical shrug, followed by a phrase that would forever be etched into my memory, a phrase delivered with a world-weary sigh. All insurance companies do this. My blood ran cold. My meticulously built case, my overwhelming evidence, my faith in the system, all of it crumbled in an instant. There was no action, no investigation, no promise of holding State Farm accountable, just a casual, cynical dismissal. She told me there was nothing they could do, that these were standard industry practices, and that if I wanted to pursue it further, I should get a lawyer. A lawyer. After all this documentation, all this undeniable proof, they wanted me to spend more money, more time, fighting a battle they should have been fighting for me. It was a crushing blow, an almost physical ache in my chest. I felt betrayed, not just by State Farm, but by the very institution meant to protect people like me. My world had not just been shaken, it had been shattered. The low point had arrived. The aftermath of that call with the OCI left me reeling. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about a profound sense of disillusionment. To know that the very authority tasked with regulating these companies would simply shrug and tell me this blatant fraud was normal was soul-destroying. It made me question everything I thought I knew about justice and fairness. The days that followed were dark. My business, Green Thumb Designs, continued to suffer. Without my Tacoma, which was still sitting in a body shop parking lot, accruing storage fees while the insurance company stalled, I was crippled. I had to rent a series of unsuitable small cars, expensive and inadequate for hauling plants, tools, or even meeting clients who expected to see my professional setup. I had to turn down larger projects, missing out on significant income. My savings, which I had carefully built for years, began to dwindle rapidly. The financial pressure was immense. I couldn't afford to keep renting a suitable truck for weeks on end, nor could I afford to buy a new one outright while State Farm withheld the funds for my old one. The stress seeped into every aspect of my life. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced at night, replaying the conversations, the denials, the OCI's dismissive shrug. I became irritable, snapping at friends and family who tried to offer support but couldn't truly understand the depth of the betrayal. My passion for landscaping, usually a source of joy and solace, felt like a burden. How could I focus on creating beauty when my own world was so ugly? I felt isolated, trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare. There were days I sat at my desk, staring at the stack of documents, feeling utterly defeated. What was the point? They were too big, too powerful. The system was rigged. They had won. I even considered for a brief, terrifying moment just giving up, accepting their pathetic offer, buying some cheap, used vehicle, and trying to forget the whole agonizing ordeal. But then, a flicker of something, a spark of defiance, ignited within me. The OCI's words echoed in my head. All insurance companies do this. That wasn't an excuse. It was an indictment. It meant this wasn't just happening to me. It was happening to countless other people, ordinary folks just like me, who were being cheated by these massive corporations with the full knowledge and complicity of their supposed protectors. My personal fight was no longer just personal. It had become a crusade. The thought that other people were suffering this same injustice, that they were being cheated out of their hard-earned money and their rights, fueled a cold, unyielding rage. If the system wouldn't protect us, then I would expose the system. I would become the voice, the undeniable proof that this was happening. My meticulously documented paper trail, which had been a shield against their lies, now became a weapon. I spent countless hours organizing everything, not just chronologically, but by theme. Fraudulent comparables, denial of policy information, regulatory inaction. Each section was a chapter in a damning book. I highlighted key phrases, circled dates, added notes explaining the significance of each document. The file grew thicker, heavier, transforming from a simple complaint into a comprehensive dossier. It wasn't just a collection of documents. It was a story, a narrative of corporate greed and governmental complicity. I knew that for the truth to be heard, it had to be presented in a way that was undeniable, unignorable. My plan began to form, clear and unwavering. First, I would take my case directly to the lawmakers, the people who had the power to change the laws that the OCI was so casually ignoring. I researched the legislative committees in Wisconsin that dealt with consumer protection and financial institutions. I found the names and contact information for the chairs of 3 key committees. Then, with my heart pounding but my resolve firm, I hand-delivered copies of my dossier to their offices in the state capitol building. I included a cover letter, concise and professional, outlining the scope of the fraud and the OCI's inaction. I emphasized that this wasn't just about my truck. It was about a systemic issue affecting countless Wisconsinites. I imagined their assistants, maybe even the chairs themselves, flipping through the pages, seeing the undeniable evidence. I left feeling a mix of trepidation and fierce determination. But I knew that wasn't enough. The media had ignored my initial attempts to get my story out, probably deeming it too small or just another insurance dispute. The regulator had shrugged. I needed a bigger platform, one that couldn't be easily dismissed. I decided to publish my full exposé myself. I chose an online platform, a widely accessible one, that allowed me to present all my evidence directly to the public. I titled it, "A Fraud That Harms Wisconsinites and a State That Won't Stop It." I uploaded every single exhibit, the emails, the screenshots of the fraudulent CCC1 data, the proof that their comparables were fake, the denials from State Farm, even the recorded video call with the OCI representative and her damning admission. I wrote the accompanying text with a clear, concise, and emotionally resonant tone, explaining the step-by-step process of how State Farm had defrauded me and how the state had failed to intervene. I shared my story, not just as a victim, but as someone who had uncovered a larger truth. The day I hit publish, my hands trembled. It felt like I was shouting into a void, but also like I was finally taking back control. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, my exposé began to go viral. It spread like wildfire through social media platforms, local community groups, and forums. People in Wisconsin, and even beyond, started sharing it, commenting, expressing their own frustrations with insurance companies. Over 500,000 views across the platform and other online communities in less than a week. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers, people sharing their own similar stories of being lowballed, stonewalled, and dismissed by their insurers. It was heartbreaking to read, but also incredibly validating. I wasn't alone. The media, which had initially ignored me, suddenly couldn't. Local news stations started reaching out, tentatively at first, then more urgently. Radio talk shows wanted me on. The very public that the state regulator had dismissed was now holding the mirror up to the injustice. Then, 2 days ago, a new email arrived. The subject line read, "Wisconsin Department of Justice inquiry regarding insurance practices." My heart leaped into my throat. The Department of Justice, the state's chief law enforcement agency, had gotten word. They had seen my exposé, or someone who had seen it had alerted them. They wanted to review everything. All 14 exhibits I had compiled, the entire detailed timeline of State Farm's fraudulent actions and the OCI's inaction. I sent the email today, a comprehensive package detailing every step, every piece of evidence. It felt like a triumph, a crack in the impenetrable wall they had built. I wasn't just submitting documents. I was sending a clear, devastating, and unignorable blueprint for how a whistleblower communication should be done. In that email to the Department of Justice's Consumer Affairs Division, I copied everyone. I copied the Attorney General and his senior staff, the governor's office, the 3 chairs of the legislative committees I had submitted my dossier to. And strategically, I blind copied the media outlets I had been in communication with, the ones who were now calling me. This wasn't just a submission, it was a declaration. I had given 25 different people, leaders, investigators, lawmakers, and the press, everything. The full, undeniable truth. It was there in their inboxes on the record. If anyone failed to act, it would not be for lack of notice. It reminded everyone reading it that inaction was now a choice, and that choice would be visible to others. The message carried the full weight of truth, not just legally, but morally. My documentation was meticulous, organized, unignorable. My narrative was human, urgent, unforgettable. My tone was uncompromising but respectful. My ask was clear, direct, and tied to the public interest. What I just sent wasn't just a submission. It was a challenge to power, a call to conscience. It was bold, grounded in evidence, emotionally resonant, and structured to pierce through bureaucracy. I had taken my pain and turned it into a purposeful force. This started as personal, but now it was public. They thought I would fold. They thought I would stay quiet. Instead, I had become the voice loud enough to shake a state. The Department of Justice investigation began swiftly and decisively. I was contacted by a team of dedicated investigators who, unlike the OCI, took every piece of my evidence seriously. They cross-referenced my documentation, subpoenaed State Farm's internal records, and began to uncover a pattern of fraudulent activity far wider than even I had initially imagined. It wasn't just my claim. It was hundreds, perhaps thousands of claims across Wisconsin and beyond, all manipulated through the same junk data from the CCC1 system. News reports, once scarce, now prominently featured headlines about the ongoing investigation into State Farm's alleged fraudulent practices. My name, Emily Carter, a landscape designer from Madison, was suddenly synonymous with consumer advocacy. I was interviewed by major news networks, my story reaching national audiences. I shared my meticulous evidence, calmly and clearly, exposing the cynical corporate strategy that had tried to silence me. The poetic justice unfolded in stages. State Farm, reeling from the public outcry and the looming threat of a massive lawsuit from the DOJ, was forced to act. They not only settled my claim for the full, fair market value of my Tacoma, but they also added a substantial sum for the lost income to my business, the rental car expenses, and the immense emotional distress they had caused. It was a victory, sweet and hard one. But the consequences for State Farm extended far beyond my individual settlement. The DOJ's investigation led to a multi-million-dollar fine against the company, a public admission of their deceptive practices, and a forced overhaul of their claim valuation systems. The CCC1 system, once their tool of fraud, was placed under intense scrutiny, its data integrity severely questioned. Adjusters like Mark, who had so flippantly dismissed my legitimate concerns, were reportedly disciplined, some even terminated. The company's stock took a hit, their reputation severely tarnished. My life, once thrown into disarray, began to settle into a new normal. I purchased a brand new, even more capable Tacoma, custom-fitted for my landscaping needs. Green Thumb Designs didn't just recover, it thrived. The publicity from my fight brought an unexpected surge of new clients, people who respected my integrity and wanted to support a business owned by someone who stood up for what was right. I found myself speaking at consumer advocacy groups, sharing my story and empowering others to fight against corporate injustice. I never sought the spotlight, but I embraced my new role as a reluctant but powerful advocate. I had changed. I was more resilient, more confident in my ability to face seemingly insurmountable challenges. The pain they inflicted had indeed transformed into purpose, a force for good. The twist, however, came from an unexpected quarter, a quiet development that made the entire saga feel even more intertwined. Months after the initial DOJ settlement, I received a discreet email marked confidential. It was from an anonymous source, someone claiming to be a former mid-level manager at State Farm. They had seen my exposé, followed the news of the DOJ investigation, and had been deeply disturbed by the company's practices. Their email contained an attachment, internal memos and spreadsheets detailing a separate, even more egregious scheme. It wasn't about underpaying claims, but about deliberately inflating repair costs for certain types of vehicles through a network of preferred body shops, funneling kickbacks back to a select few high-level executives within State Farm. My fight, which started with a simple fender bender and a rigged valuation, had inadvertently shone a light so bright that it revealed a much darker, more systematic corruption within the very heart of the insurance giant, a conspiracy that stretched far beyond stolen comparable vehicles and into the realm of organized financial crime. My receipts, it turned out, were just the beginning.